Hello, everyone. I just spent the last year building an interactive D&D one-shot in my living room. So this is a deep dive into all of the tools that I used and the technical aspects that went into different things. Parts of it won't be relevant for everyone, so feel free to skip around. It made more sense to fit all of this into one video. And I want to preface all of this by saying if you're anywhere near me geographically and you still want to do this, you are more than welcome to, if I haven't asked you yet. I've already gone through the list of people that I wanted to force through it. Don't be offended if I haven't asked you. I would just much rather know ahead of time that someone is interested and wants to do it and wants to play it at this point versus me trying to describe what it is and trying to convince someone to try it. So if at any point this sounds interesting, just stop watching, call me, and let's play it. But why? Why make this? Well, I'm very interested in what's called immersive art, or transmedia, or experience design. Things like the Jejune Institute, the Latitude Society, Year Zero, Meow Wolf, Burning Man, all these have elements or are some example of this. The general wisdom is the more immersive and interactive something can be, the more mediums you can leverage at once, the more potential there is for truly novel experiences versus flat or limited narratives. This project came about very casually. My friend Ree and I were sitting on the couch and he wanted to do a haunted house. This was in October of 2019. And I recognized the impulse. I think everyone enjoys making cool shit with your friends. And I knew I wanted to do something, but I also knew in that short of a time period, it wasn't really feasible, or we couldn't do anything really ambitious or take our time with things. I didn't just want to end up with an escape room or have to rely on a bunch of physical interactions because I know how demanding those things can be just in terms of time and resources. I eventually came around to the idea of role-playing since D&D has a very flexible setting, and I knew the theme could overlap enough with our original idea to do something spooky. And I could fit or fill as many gaps as I wanted with something interactive we could actually incorporate. I had DM'd most editions before, but only sporadically over the years, and I'd never written anything with a tight narrative of any length, really. I knew I wanted it to be a one-shot because I thought that would be the most accessible, only requires one session. I could pre-build the characters, and then we could really structure the physical interactive elements around things that we thought could be more predictable. Writing was the most difficult part by far. First, because it required a very tight set of predictable interactions or encounters to make sure people got to experience everything that we were physically building into the adventure, but also because it just didn't feel like it came naturally to me at all. I felt very overwhelmed more than once just with this specific aspect, and so I did it, and so because of that, I just want to share some of the things that worked for me that I felt if they were spelled out from the beginning, I think it would have made an incredible difference, and it would have happened or gone much more smoothly and happened a lot faster. I had both terrible and amazing luck at finding other writers to mentor me. But my initial outline was objectively bad, but the first person that I hired to actually look at it was extremely critical and very unenthusiastic with this whole idea. That set me back quite a bit. I internalized that I needed to go back and start over completely from the beginning, that the core idea at the center of what I wanted to experiment with wasn't interesting or too much of a trope. And there were 6 whole months that I didn't touch the entire project, even though I was still walking through it in my living room and knew I wanted and needed to finish it. Luckily, I got back enough of my inspiration to try again, and I started over, and I built enough of an outline and an idea, and then I posted on a subreddit called DM Academy. And very quickly, I met someone named Zango and described what I was trying to do, and he was interested right away. And it was just this very actively encouraging relationship that made really all the difference at that phase. I should mention I told very few people about this project the entire time I was working on it for over a year, even though I spent hundreds of hours on many different aspects of it. And I do this with most projects of this type. The approach has some fairly obvious pros and cons. The pros are I don't have any strict deadlines. I don't have to manage other people's expectations based on what I may have said or decided to change. And I can really leverage my own delayed sense of gratification in terms of then being able to spring it on people or genuinely bring them into an experience that they have no pretext for or weren't expecting at all. And that worked very well, I think, for this in particular. The cons or the challenges are getting through what is essentially a vacuum. Because I was collaborating with such a limited set of artists and other people, and there were so few people invested in what I was doing, it can be very difficult to get through some of the challenges when you are the only person holding something in your head. I'm constantly trying to approach or use this approach more granularly because it's very, very difficult. And I think it goes sort of without saying that finding good collaborators and support is key. And I was very lucky to find someone like Zango at the particular time.
I am not the friendly GM. I am not the polite GM. I am not the cuddly GM.
When I was deep in my read everything about writing to avoid writing phase, I came across tons of authors and advice on story crafting or adventure building and role-playing. ANGRYGM was the best of these by a long shot. He can be a little abrasive, but I think everything that he puts out is dead on in terms of how adventures should be written and how DM should actually work. Could say you could just check out the article in the description if you want a jumping off point. I also linked to a particular outline someone else had made that combines all of his advice into a sort of a very concise 2-page document that I referenced regularly. It requires some context in terms of knowing the other things that he's written, but I used it many, many times, and I really can't recommend his work enough if you're looking for some solid advice and guidance on how to structure and craft things.
How about Sunrise Land?
In my okay, I'm actually writing now phase, I picked a quiet bench in a sunny park where I regularly went specifically to write. This was where I did all the initial outlines and the core aspects of my story, and I went to eliminate all the distractions or other thoughts I might have anywhere else. I would use my time going there to consciously relax and prepare my mind to write. And I noticed the more I did this, the more it helped and the easier it got. And this probably sounds really obvious why it worked, but nothing I found specifically spelled out using a particular method like this. And I know I couldn't have regularly reached into the weird writing realms of my mind if I wasn't doing it this way. So I would highly recommend it to anyone. I'd also be very curious if there is somewhere that spells out doing this and other ways it can work, or if there's a name for it. So please let me know, but I would highly recommend doing it. Okay, I am someone who is constantly looking for better ways to outline my projects and ways to fit them into my head. I also had a very long let's outline because writing is hard phase for this particular project. So I tried everything as a result. And some of it is to avoid writing, but I think anyone that does projects similar to this can relate. You are trying to fit so much into your head at once and understand how all of the pieces fit together that it can be really overwhelming. It all needs to be sort of immediately accessible and at the very least organized so that you don't waste work and know exactly what you should be focusing on next. There's nothing worse than trying to scroll through a bloated Google Doc that has the vague promise of something great or cool, especially when you're too exhausted to even try to figure out how you should organize it or what you should remove to know where you should start next or what's a waste of your time or what doesn't even need to be in there. I've been at this point with a lot of past projects. I spent such a considerable amount of time figuring this out for this one that I can confidently say I know the way it should be done. Just to give you a rundown, I tried Google Docs, mind maps, I tried immersive writing software, giant whiteboards, I tried Noda maps. I sat on my floor for hours moving around dots in virtual reality to construct outlines. Was it fun? Yeah. Did it actually help? I don't think so. I think I figured out what does actually work. I started all of my ideas on pen and paper in the park on the bench, just like I described before. I think it's the most conductive format for really feeling out ideas and coaxing them out of the ether. Then afterwards, I would input them into the computer and flesh them out and edit them while I was doing that. If I still wasn't sure how something should flow or fit within the story, I used a LUCID chart to systematically lay out every idea or outcome that I could think of. This is called a mind map, and LUCID chart is easily the best platform for building them. They're great because you can make a map as big as you want and still keep things organized. It let me externalize every idea that I had, keep track of them, and then branch off each individually to see where I thought they could go and what worked and what didn't. My final outline ended up in Notion. Notion is what Google Docs would be if Google actually gave a shit. It is the best online collaborative writing platform. It also gives you the ability to easily nest pages within a document so that I could have all of my meta notes, checklists, and my actual adventure script easily accessible within the same document. It's the best tool for this, and it has lots of applications outside writing just weird D&D adventures. What did I actually come up with? My adventure is called Faydrift Tower. It's about a powerful wizard who is hidden in a magical place called the Fade. The gist is there's a druid who the players are close to who finds this tower in the Fade where the wizard is and becomes trapped there, but manages to get a call for help out via her familiar. The players get the call for help and assemble a party and set out to rescue her. In the process, the adventure starts, the players are already in the Fade, and they are exploring the dungeon, trying to figure out who the wizard is and how they can find their druid friend and get her out. It ended up being pretty linear in terms of how role-playing can go, but no one ever had any negative feedback or comments in terms of that. I definitely could have added more variables or paths. I'm still happy with how the characters and the overall story turned out in general. I don't really feel like going into any more detail than that, since some people might still want to play it, even if they've watched this far. And I don't think me telling a ton of the story here is necessarily what I set out to do with this video. I more wanted to show how I made it and how I designed it. So let's talk about the most important thing I thought in terms of the design was making this as accessible and fluid as possible. I wanted people who had never roleplayed before or hadn't played D&D much at all to be able to step in with the least amount of resistance possible. And this can be kind of unrealistic in terms of role-playing standards and how verbose and complex game mechanics can be. But I knew as long as I had a firm understanding of the rules, I could set out to try and automate or leverage as many digital tools as possible to try to make this whole experience as smooth as possible. Foundry is a virtual tabletop software that allowed me to automate pretty much all of these aspects. I could select on my screen a target and a character and an ability, roll, and then it would automatically apply the damage if they hit. It meant I had a battle map that only I could see from where I was sitting, but it gave me access to all of the players' and enemies' stats, abilities, and any other information. I did structure all of the encounters in a way where they weren't overly complicated. They were easy to follow for both me and the players. But this software filled in all of the gaps and made everything as smooth as it possibly could be in terms of the mechanics. Characters still had their own physical character sheets that they could reference and showed them exactly what they could do and what they had on their person. I tried to design them in a way that made them as simple and readable as possible while still being cool to look at. Foundry, though, is the best VTT out there. It has amazing potential in terms of the state of mods for it. If you're gaming at a distance or looking for a modern digital battle map or attempting anything like this, this is the best tool to use currently. My setup let me, as a DM, have all the benefits of a VTT as while still allowing the players to use physical dice and to not ever have to rely or look at a screen. I had two large speakers pointing into the room just behind this longest wall, so I had no trouble filling it with sound at any particular time. I was in a separate room the entire time, but I could hear what was happening in here, and I projected my voice in through the speakers. I used a tool called Voice Mod to modulate or change my voice when I was talking as certain characters, either as the evil guy or the weird lonely guy in the desert, but I only used it sparingly, and I mostly narrated or talked in my normal voice. I used a piece of software called Sirenscape to build soundscapes for all the encounters, the scenes or the rooms. It also acted as a soundboard for individual events as they occurred in the story. So that meant each significant scene or specific action taken by the players had an audible personality, and it made things way more dramatic and interesting throughout the whole adventure. I could also easily switch between scenes by just clicking in the sidebar here, and this would play a group of sounds at once or on loop. So, for example, if players stepped into a raging thunderstorm, it would play the rain, the thunder, and lightning that I had collected continuously until I moved or clicked on a different scene. I could also put audio cues in my script so I knew exactly when I wanted to play specific sounds or change the soundscape and time it with my narration and the player's actions. Sirenscape is the only tool I'm aware of that does this really well at all. The web-based interface can be a little bit clunky at times, but once I had set it up and built all my soundscapes, picked all my sounds, it worked very well. It also lets you stream audio as you're playing it to other machines if you're running games online, but it was also very useful for what I was doing as well. For example, I actually had a separate computer outputting the sounds as I played them to activate some LED strips in the ceiling. They were sound reactive, so that meant I could use them in combination with specific light patterns that I designed and punctuate them with certain sounds and effects like lightning or spells as they happened in the story. I also had 6 LED bulbs in the ceiling. These combined with the strips and 2 separate apps with some pre-configured scenes or lighting configurations gave me very granular control over the lighting in the room at any particular time. And I used these to punctuate every room or scene or different actions within the story as they happened and just really bring them to life without overriding the theater of mind. There were a number of interactive elements. that we incorporated into the adventure. The table the players played on had a compartment inside and lights that I could activate remotely. Players would find the table in the game, and once it lit up, they would realize they could open it using a magnetic stamp that they found earlier, and there was the wizard's spellbook inside. This section of wall would light up, and players could remove it at one point to find a shelf with a bunch of stuff inside. There was a locked compartment at the bottom of it, which I actually had players pick with actual lock picks. There was a bag of lock picks on the table at the start of the session, and I really wanted people to try doing this. I made a video to kind of guide them along, and most people were able to get it in just a couple of minutes. Picking locks isn't quite as hard as you'd think, especially if you have a good set of tools and something to kind of help you along. I made this hole in the wall where a wolf's head gets pushed through, which we used as a way to pass players certain objects and add some other effects into the room. There were some smaller things. We shot air into the room with an air compressor. We also shot arrows, wooden arrows, dowels that weren't pointy on either end. We weren't trying to hit the people in the room, just scare them. This entire section of wall also moves. We pushed it forward slowly at a point where the room that the players were in the story was actually collapsing. It was a great effect. All of these were spread throughout the adventure and connected to specific actions or choices driven entirely by the players. So I couldn't narrate or DM all of these at the same time. There was always a second person helping me run the adventure just on the other side of this wall who activated everything. They had access to the script and Notion and a monitor so they could see into the room at all times as well. Most of the time, they weren't really engaged, and if I could do it again, I would find a way to incorporate them more into the story as an NPC or with some of the interactive elements. They were still absolutely essential since I couldn't narrate and DM and run all the physical aspects of the room from somewhere else at the same time. I set things up so I sat at a computer in a different room next to the one the players were playing in. This made it so the speakers that were outputting the sound into the room didn't cause feedback between my microphone that I was speaking into the whole time. I still had a monitor so I could see what was happening in the room at any given time and hear what the players were saying. I also had another monitor that showed me Sirenscape, Foundry, voice mod, and then the script in Notion so I could follow along all the light, sound, and narration cues that I had created. And then finally I had another laptop running OBS that was connected to this TV, and I would use that to kind of open and close the adventure with like a title screen and add some general visual ambiance to different environments or places that the players found themselves in. All of this combined meant I had very granular control over the set and setting of the room. It was still a lot to troubleshoot and run all the wires and figure out what worked the best and made sense and not alert my landlord to all of the sort of crazy modifications I was making over the year. This project was pretty stupidly ambitious for a single person based on my other experiences writing, DMing, and all the technical aspects that eventually went into it. Ree did help me put up the physical walls and do a lot of the physical things and had the original idea for it. Zango and Jake definitely helped me write and come up with ideas for it. I could not have done it without them. And Christina helped me work through a lot of some of the technical aspects. But there's still an overwhelming majority of it that was done entirely by me and myself. I would say I suffered quite a bit because of that, but I don't think I could have done it any other way otherwise. I could certainly do it differently, better now, or iterate on it. But based on the size of the city that I'm in, the amount of artist community, the people that I know, it's a bit unreasonable to ask anyone to hold something like this in their head. and enable them to give you good feedback on. I've run a number of people through the adventure now. I would consider it a limited success, which I'm pleased with, but I'm not necessarily excited by. My goal was to make something that people were excited enough about to want to share with other people and include them in. But that didn't really happen in any capacity. So everyone said they enjoyed doing it. I think we enjoyed doing it together. It just didn't branch out to anyone else that I didn't personally put through it. I'm certain I could ask them to help me find more people to share it with. I'm just saying that it didn't do that of its own accord. It didn't quite have the legs, as I would call it. And I'm not disappointed, but I'm just saying that's part of how I plan to gauge how successful it would or could be. In addition to that, I don't think it fundamentally transcended role-playing as a format. It might sound insane if I say that I set out thinking that that was even possible in some way, but remember, I'm very interested in the potential of immersive storytelling and art and trying to create new ways of experiencing stories. I would have needed more people and collective experience writing and designing to really take a shot at doing something at that level. But this still hasn't stopped me from reaching for that or wanting to do something like that. Whatever I can get away with, really. In conclusion, I am very thankful to everyone that helped me with this. I was really challenged and learned an incredible amount about things that I'd never done before. I hope everyone who played it or went through it enjoyed it. And if you haven't and you somehow listened to all of this, please don't hesitate to let me know. And I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this tiny little glimpse into this weird little adventure and what came out of it. If you have any questions or want to know more, hit me up in the comments below.